Hurricane season starts in just a few weeks. Today, I talk one-on-one with ABC News 4's Chief Meteorologist Dave Williams for a preview of this hurricane season. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. ABC News 4 Chief Meteorologist Dave Williams. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin. Good to see you.
Yes, well, the last time I saw you was right over here on Coleman when we were actually at the starting line for the bridge run in April.
Yeah. Hey, we both finished. You finished before me. But you're also about 10 years younger than me, I believe.
Oh, no, just turned 37.
About 10 years younger than me.
Yes, that was a good run, and I hope I can get back to doing it again next year. But yeah, absolutely. But even then the weather was cold. Now it's a little hot out here. So what's the next 4 hours going to be like here in Charleston?
Well, it is muggy out there today because we're ahead of a cold front. We're even seeing a couple showers and thunderstorms pop up ahead of this cold front, which the more we can get, the better, because we are in a drought. So I'll take all the rain we can get. But it looks like most of our rain's going to be coming in on Friday, probably in a couple waves. One wave in the morning, maybe one wave later in the afternoon, and then maybe one wave after midnight, but both for sunrise on Saturday. And then we're done. Wow. And we're done with the rain. So we'll have a gorgeous Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And take me back to the drought, Dave. Obviously, what are the deficits right now?
The deficits are sitting about 4 3/4 inches to about 5.5, 6 inches. So we really need some good rain. We need that to soak in, and we can't get that all at once. So we had a good rain on Sunday. I heard you lost your phone out in the rain running, so that was a good soaking rain. We got about 1.5 inches there. If we can get a few of those over the next couple of weeks, then things will be looking a lot better.
And how's the drought looking, say, now versus a year or two ago?
Right now, it's a very short-term kind of thing here. We haven't seen any long-term droughts, which is really good. Yeah. So this one has only been for like the last several months, and that's typically how it is around here. If it does get dry, it's usually only a few months at a time. So we should be able to dig out over the summer, and that's my hope.
Speaking of summer, speaking of months ahead of time, and obviously the seasonal thing, let's talk about hurricane season. It's coming up here in a couple of days, and I know that NOAA is actually forecasting an above normal hurricane season in the Atlantic with up to 21 named storms this year. 10 storms can actually become hurricanes, the agency says, and 3 to 6 storms may reach Category 3 or 5. Actually, does Dave, normal really implies that there is an average number of hurricane tropical storms. If the number of these events have been actually above normal for the 7 straight years, wouldn't that raise the average number in your mind?
So honestly, Quintin, it's based on a 30-year average, and this just changed last year. So they just re-upped those numbers as of last year on the 30-year average. So it goes based on the decades. So that would have been that would have been the 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s. So that's the new 30-year average right now, and that'll last us through until 2031. So, or 2031. So we've got the averages now set, and they did go up a little bit last year. So, and I noticed you said that the forecast is for up to 21 storms. So that's the high end. That's the high end. So it was 14 to 21 named storms, and that starts with the average and goes just a little bit above average. So hopefully we're going to see close to average and maybe slightly above average season. And it's based on the fact that La Nina is setting in right now. Right. So I'm sure you were wondering why those numbers are above average, and it's because La Nina is setting up. And what La Nina is, it's the cooling of the tropical Pacific water off of South Africa or South America. And what that does is it weakens the jet stream a little bit. So the jet stream, when it comes across the Atlantic basin, isn't quite as strong. So it doesn't shear apart those storms out in the Atlantic Ocean, and it allows more storms to form from a small storm, possibly into a bigger system.
Ooh. Well, actually, this, Dave, I'm pretty sure you answered this in the last answer, but how many consecutive years does it take to be considered the new normal?
And it does. It's based on a 30-year average because the last two seasons that we saw where we had below normal activity, that would be 2014 and 2015. We saw 2 years in a row. And there's a very good possibility that within the next few years, we are going to see some quieter years because the last several years have been very active. So it goes in a cycle, and it kind of goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It's kind of like the waves on the ocean. So what we're seeing right now, we're kind of at the crest, maybe heading down toward the next trough. So it should be quieter as we head through the next few seasons. So that's my hope anyway.
And the number of major hurricanes over the Atlantic has risen by how much?
What was that again?
Yes, sir. The number of major hurricanes over the Atlantic, how much has that risen by much?
That really hasn't changed a whole lot. So it's about 3 major hurricanes per season. So that's pretty much stayed the same. And that could change in the future. Like we said, they base that on a 30-year average. So right now it's going to stay at 3, but that could go up as we head toward 2030.
Ooh. And how far in the alphabet do you think we'll get this particular season?
I really don't think we're going to make it to the alternate alphabet this year. So I would imagine we'll stay within the regular list of names that they've got ready to go this year.
And obviously, when you talk about hurricane season, Texas, Florida, they're always, at the, ground zero for this particular situation. How does that loop current look from, say, Texas to Florida?
Let's say, and there you mentioned 2 states with a lot more coastline than South Carolina has. Texas has a huge coastline that goes across the Gulf Coast. And when you think about Florida, Florida goes from the Gulf Coast all the way down and then back up around into the Atlantic side. So there's a much greater likelihood that those places will be struck by a tropical system than right here in South Carolina. Plus, by the time a storm gets up towards South Carolina, the storms start in the trade winds, and they blow from the east to the west across the Atlantic Ocean. But once they start to curve back to the north, they start to get into the polar westerlies. And that's when they start to turn back around. So where we are in South Carolina, we're in a lot better position because we're farther north, because those storms do typically start to curve because the steering currents higher in the atmosphere push those storms back to the east. So the likelihood that we're going to get hit here in South Carolina is almost always much lower than Texas or Florida.
Thank God, in the name of Jesus. And I learned about this a little bit last night doing the research, but what will the ocean heat current be like this summer?
So the Atlantic Basin is warm. It's been warm for the last several years. And due to climate change, the ocean basin may stay warmer for the next several years. So like you said, there is the possibility that we are going to see more energy just in the Atlantic Basin itself to cause more hurricanes in the future. It hasn't been realized necessarily just yet, but that could be something we have to contend with in the future.
Oh, and with all that you just mentioned there, Dave, this might be a silly question. How do they actually make these predictions?
So most of it is based on the seasonal averages. They kind of figure, okay, here's our average numbers going into the year. Do we have an El Nino? Do we have a La Nina? If we've got an El Nino, then the numbers are probably going to be a little bit lower. Do we have a La Nina? The numbers are probably going to be a little bit higher. And that's why this year we're seeing those numbers pretty much close to average and then slightly above average because we are headed toward an La Nina, and we're actually in a La Nina right now.
Wow. Oh, and that brings me to my next question. Why does June, the first month of hurricane season, why does it tend to be so slow as far as the hurricane season?
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the water temperature out in the Atlantic Ocean. So if you think about it, the ocean water warms up fairly slowly. So once the sun crosses the equator and comes up toward the Tropic of Cancer, then you start to see the ocean water really warming up. And the farther north that the sun comes, the warmer the water temperatures get. So your water temperature is not actually the warmest until late July into August. And that's why the hurricane season is actually right about the beginning of summer, but then lasts all the way into the fall because the water is going to stay warmer into the fall.
Wow, that's just amazing information there. And You said it earlier, but this is another question I wanted to ask you. What areas of the country in the world are actually becoming resilient against these stronger, wetter, and slower moving storms?
Becoming resilient.
Resilient against those storms, I should say.
Yeah. It's really tough to tell. I mean, because every storm's going to throw something different at us. Back in 2005, New Orleans thought they were prepared to handle Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
They certainly weren't. And they weren't even on the strong side of the storm. They were on the weak side of the storm. They have improved their resiliency. And during recent hurricanes along the Gulf Coast, they have had better success rates in places like New Orleans. So, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a disaster to realize how vulnerable you are. And then after that, you start to become more resilient. So hopefully we can be a little bit proactive here in Charleston. And I think the government is somewhat proactive, and they've been trying to take steps against coastal flooding and against sea level rise. And hopefully we will be a little bit better prepared for hurricanes coming our way.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned this too in the earlier interview, but has there been a year in recent history where it was expected to be a less active season?
And I'm not a big fan of the preseason hurricane forecast because it doesn't tell you a lot of things. It just basically throws a number out at you. But what it doesn't tell you are things like if you're going to get hit. It doesn't tell you where storms are going to form. Right. It doesn't tell you when storms are going to form. And it doesn't tell you where those storms are headed. They could stay out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which is fine. That wouldn't do a whole lot. Maybe disrupt some shipping channels. But as far as having a season where you're going to forecast above or below, usually they're fairly close. And when I say fairly close, that's within like 3 to 5 storms. That sounds like a whole lot,
yes,
especially if you get hit by 3 to 5 storms. But usually the preseason forecast is usually in the ballpark.
Wow. And speaking of being out in the Atlantic Ocean, let me ask you, this is the question I was thinking about last night, but would the Hurricane would that stop any of these storms by chance?
And it gets lofted high up into the... If you think about how thunderstorms form because of rising air. So the air is rising up through the atmosphere. When you've got Saharan dust coming across the Atlantic Ocean, eventually gravity is going to pull that down toward the surface. And as it falls down toward the surface, that's causing sinking air through the atmosphere. So when you have sinking air, that's going to be counterproductive to a hurricane trying to form with the rising air. So Saharan dust actually creates sinking air throughout the atmosphere, and that keeps a lot of storms from actually starting to flare up.
Thank God for that, for the dust.
Absolutely.
We take those things very lightly. But let me ask you this, Dave. Let me ask you a blunt question. How do we prepare right now for this season?
That's a great question. You can do a lot of things around your house. Make sure your trees are pruned and the outside of your house is ready to go in case of a hurricane. Have a disaster preparedness plan for your family. Make sure you know what you're going to do if a storm approaches. So if a hurricane comes to your house and there's an evacuation order issued, know where you're going to go. Have that plan ready to go right now. Say if the storm's going to come, well, I'm going to go inland to Columbia. Make sure you know what hotels you're going to go to. Make sure you have your insurance policy with you when you leave your house. Make sure you have your doctor aware that you need to pick up prescriptions, things like that. And if you are going to stay, make sure you're ready to stay here because you could be cut off. If a hurricane does come through and does damage, you could be cut off for several days from the rest of civilization. No cell phones. No Wi-Fi, no TV, no electricity. Make sure and no water. So make sure that you have disaster preparedness kits with at least 3 days worth of water and food. Make sure that you have a first aid kit ready to go. just know that you could be on your own for a little while, and it's not going to be real comfortable. That's why I say whenever there's an evacuation order issued, it's best to go. Even if we don't think the storm is going to hit necessarily right here, it's best to go, because in the worst case scenario, you could be stuck without the creature comforts you're used to for many, many days. And you could be putting yourself, possibly your life, in danger, and you just don't want to do that. It's not worth it.
Not at all. Well, ABC News 4 Chief Meteorologist Dave Williams with your most certified, most accurate weather. Thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin. Great to talk with you.
Likewise.